Hello and welcome to this step-by-step sewing tutorial for the Raven dress pattern. This sewing pattern is available for immediate download on my website, link in the description, and is perfect for at least confident beginner sewists. The first step is to wash and dry your fabric, then assemble the pattern. One thing that's great about the pattern is that it should be taped at the edges, so there's no need to trim or overlap the papers. There's also an option for those who use a projector to cut their fabric. Once all of your pieces are cut, overlock the edges so that they don't fray when you sew. I don't have a serger, so I'm using my machine zigzag stitch and it works perfectly fine. Press seams as you go, including the overlock stitches so that it flattens the bulk on the edges and sets the seams into the fabric. We're all prepped and ready to start sewing. We'll pin and sew the side front pieces to the center front, and the side back pieces to the center back. To pin princess seams together, I find it easiest to pin and sew with the center front piece on top to have a really smooth seam and minimize the chances of bunching. I also pin closer together along the curves. We'll sew all the side pieces to the center pieces, then the side front and the side back pieces together. We'll do this with the main fabric and the lining fabric. Now we have the bodice main and lining, and it should look like this. We're going to press our seams, so clip the seam allowance where there are curves so that we can press the bodice flat. To press your fabric for the best final result, press it first as it was sewn, then press the seam allowance open, then press from the right side. I'm not going to show all the pressing in this tutorial, but I press every seam this way. It takes time, but pressing is a huge contributor to a good final result, and the time spent is so worth it. Fold the strap in half and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Use a loop turner to turn the fabric right side out. Repeat on the other strap. Sometimes the strap can stretch out when turning it right side out, so measure the strap to make sure it will fit perfectly on your body. With the right side of the strap facing the right side of the main fabric, and the seam allowances of the bodice and strap together, sew the strap to the side front piece where it touches the center front seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then sew to the side back piece where it touches the center back seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure the strap is not twisted before you sew. Repeat on the other strap. Create a 1/8 inch double rolled hem on the top and bottom raw edges of the cowl neck piece. Pin the cowl neck piece in place with the wrong side of the cowl neck touching the right side of the bodice and the top of the cowl neck piece just below the straps. I like to create a 1/2 inch gather where the side of the cowl neck meets the armhole. Sew the sides of the cowl neck to the armhole of the side front pieces with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and sew the bottom of the cowl neck to the bodice 1/8 inch away from the edge. You can gather and hand sew the center of the cowl neck together at this point or leave the center as it is. Pin and sew the neckline of the main fabric and lining fabric together. Leave about 1 to 2 inches at the beginning and end of the center back for the zipper installation. I like to mark this gap with 2 pins. I also like to pin the straps straight down so that they get sewn straight and flat. I pin all the straps down, then continue pinning the neckline of the main and lining fabric together. I'm going to sew the neckline, then understitch, which means sewing the neckline seam allowances to the lining side to prevent the neckline from rolling out. We won't be able to understitch continuously, so work in sections around the straps and the center of the sweetheart neckline. Then, hem the bodice lining with a 3/8 inch hem. Mark the center point of the main bodice. I just folded in half to find it. Then fold the front top skirt in half and mark the center point. Center the front top skirt, then mark where the princess seams of the bodice meet the skirt. Measure the dart length of the pattern piece, then measure and mark the distance away from our princess seam marking. Lining up the pattern piece to our dart markings. Use a pin and push it through the pattern piece and the fabric. Then mark this point on the fabric. Fold at the dart markings on the waist of the skirt and have this fold meet at the dart point. Mark a curved dart with your French curve and sew. To sew a dart, start from the waist and sew all the way down to the point. Sew to the very edge of the fabric, so close that your next stitch would sew off the fabric. It's okay if you even sew off the fabric. Then, don't backstitch because we're going to finish it off with a hand-tied knot instead. Tie it twice and cut the thread, but not too close to the knot. Line up the back top skirt piece with the center back and repeat this dart process for the back top skirt pieces. Iron the dart as it was sewn, then to one side from the wrong side, then on the right side. I like to use steam at the dart point to get that area really seamless and smooth. Take your invisible zipper and measure its length along the bodice and back top skirt pieces. Mark where the zipper will end, then sew the 2 back top skirt pieces together from this marking to the bottom. Sew 2 basting stitches on the top edge of the bottom skirt piece using your longest stitch length, one with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and the other with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Repeat on the other bottom skirt piece. Gather the bottom skirt fabric and pin to the front top skirt. I like to gather from one side to just over the half point, align the half points of the front top skirt to the bottom skirt, Then pin starting from that half point first. Then finish pinning the gathered bottom skirt fabric. Sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance between the two basting stitches. Then remove the visible basting stitch thread. Repeat this with the other bottom skirt fabric and the back top skirt pieces. Line up the seam lines where the front top skirt and bottom skirt meet and sew the sides of the two full skirt pieces together. Pin and sew the skirt to the bodice, making sure to line up your princess seams and dart seam lines. To perfectly align them, I like to pin lower than 3/8 inch away from the edge with the seam lines matching. Then pin near the edge where I'm going to sew with the seam lines matching. After sewing, your dart seam lines and princess seam lines should match up smoothly. Now we just have the finishings. At this point, I installed the invisible zipper. I have a full in-depth tutorial posted covering how to sew an invisible zipper to a dress with lining, which I'll link in the description and will put on the screen at the end of this video. Now for the hem of the dress. Let the dress hang on a hanger overnight. Then try on the dress to determine where you'll need to hem it. If you plan on wearing this dress with heels, wear heels when trying on the dress before pinning the hem. I'm 5'4" and need to hem it by 2 inches, so I'll fold the hem at 1 inch, sew, then fold it another inch and sew. I like to sew both folds of a double rolled hem because I find it stays flatter and smoother after washing and drying. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it easy to follow. Don't forget to subscribe so that you stay updated with new sewing pattern releases. Thanks for watching!